Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 772. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature our interview with Ahmed Wasfy. We discuss the role of the engineering manager and how people learn to be engineering managers. Coming to grips with the new role requires learning new skills, not just rehashed technical skills. Ahmed advises new leaders to take control of their careers and not be a victim. Ahmed is an experienced engineering leader, having led teams at Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. In addition to his day job, Ahmed also helps engineering managers become effective leaders through his coaching. Links in the show notes to his site, thethrivingem.com. Are you ready to grapple with what it's like to be an engineering manager? It's time for the interview. Ahmed Wasfy, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited for this conversation. You have a method of helping new engineering managers actually become leaders and managers and all those good words. But before we dive into that, let's just make sure that we sync on the term engineering manager. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a loaded term, I suppose. You'd find different definitions depending on who you ask. The way I have seen it or have experienced it is in a traditional sort of tech company. An engineering manager is someone that handles the people management aspects of the role plus. And the plus could mean everything from more technical pieces of work to project management, to whatever that needs to happen depending on the size of your company. Typically, the smaller you are, the more hats you'd have to wear as an engineering manager, and the larger you are, the more established the role would be with clearer kind of role guidelines and whatnot.
How hard is it to help someone when it's unclear and it's sort of an amorphous role? It could be anything, including watering the plants.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges with transitioning into the role as a manager, because not just there's a lack of sort of definition of what is expected of you, but also when you don't understand that very well, how do you measure progress? How do you know that you're doing a good job? How do you know that you're progressing? And that's definitely one of the first things, I do when I work with folks. I actually start with this kind of online assessment that I have that helps them rate, how effective of a manager they are today. And oftentimes, if you don't know what what the role should be or what you're looking for, it's really hard to know what to focus on and what to improve. And that's, the first thing we start off. It's exactly like in any other domain. If you run ads for your business, if you don't know your numbers, you're just flying blind. You're doing something that you don't know how to optimize for. You don't know where are the constraints, where are the bottlenecks. So you got to start with that clarity, and I think that's always the number one step.
How do you help somebody who can't define what the role is? It's the organization likes it being amorphous. How do you help them?
So it depends on what kind of organization they're coming from, but I think it starts with setting the right expectations with the decision makers in their org. So I often, advise talk to your manager first, right? Like set very clear expectations, make sure the two of you are in a line. Ideally, your manager and your skip level, if a skip level exists in your current structure, make sure everyone is aligned on, what are the main KPIs that we should be tackling here, and then take it from there essentially.
What problems do people generally have? I mean, this has got to be a fairly common problem that people have, right?
Right.
I mean, the first thing they tend to probably do is just emulate the person who was there before, right?
Exactly.
Hopefully they can get fired.
Or sometimes do the opposite. Like I had a manager that never had one-on-ones, for instance, and that was a really painful thing to see in front of my eyes. And that was one of the things when I first became a manager. I was like, I'm never skipping a one-on-one again, because I've seen how kind of how quickly it erodes trust in a team when the manager doesn't even care about having one-on-ones. But yeah, I mean, the typical problem, right? So I think it starts with this problem of feedback loops where you don't know what the role is supposed to be, so you don't know how to measure it. as an individual contributor, when you're coming up as a software engineer, let's say, there are very quick ways to get feedback from everyone around you, right? Like you could send, you could send a pull request, or you get feedback on the code that you just kind of wrote. You could publish that code to production. Hopefully, you have some instrumentation, some metrics, and get some data, and you know how that code is doing, either performance-wise or against your actual business goals. There's often a lot of other forms to get feedback, design reviews, et cetera, et cetera. As a manager, you kind of lose all of that. And I think the hardest thing to start with is figuring out quicker ways to get feedback along the path. And if you think of it at an even higher level, your main goals as a manager, growing individuals on your team and delivering on business objectives, these things take months, if not years, to actually materialize. So without those kind of indicators that you're doing the right job, I think that's the hardest thing you need to start with early on. And often it's honestly not just the skill that managers need to have. It's this idea of first order consequences versus second or nth order consequence after that. Being okay with that and waiting for longer times to get a result, I think also benefits you in life. A typical example is working out. You go to the gym, one day you'll feel sore. That's a first order kind of consequence right away. But if you keep doing it long enough, hopefully your body would actually improve, and you be fitter and you get all the goodness. So that's the typical. That's kind of the first problem. The second one I see a lot as well with new managers is there's a lot of focus on hard technical skills as an IC. You want to learn the latest coding, languages, or understand this framework. And there's a lot of resources out there to help engineers develop those. But there's very little focus on soft skills, right? Things like communication or negotiation or influencing people without authority, et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes, these soft skills are just hard because of the same reason, because you cannot really measure them very, very accurately, and it's hard to reason about them. And then the third and the last one I'll kind of end with, in this kind of most common section, is you get overwhelmed when you switch to roles to becoming a manager. You get overwhelmed mostly by this kind of the manager time versus maker time idea, where now your calendar is all over the place. You're jumping around from meeting to meeting. So getting a better handle on that, I think, is really the fundamental kind of building block to help you start tackling, the first couple of issues that we talked about.
Do you see, especially new engineering managers, having a difficult time putting down the keyboard and, stop coding or stop testing or stop doing whatever their team was doing before?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I think I personally have struggled with, and I see a lot of new managers struggle with for a couple of reasons. The first and obvious one is, it's what got you here. You're good at it. It's something that continues to, for some time at least, give you kind of positive feedback. So you're like, hey, I actually understand that, especially if you get promoted or if you become a manager in your current team, where you understand, your tech stack much better than a lot of the others. But then the second reason, and it's more nuanced, is that I often see managers who are not confident they could succeed as a manager, and they don't want to lose out on the opportunity to switch back to their programming career. So like, I'm going to hold on to this for as long as I can, in case this other thing doesn't work out.
I'm not sure that having a fallback plan is the best idea in some circumstances, right? If you're trying to do both and trying to do both well, you're probably going to do neither pretty well.
I agree. There's, what was that metaphor? You got to burn burn the ships or whatever. At some point, you got to decide and cut that other path completely, even if in the short term it might be worse off in terms of just how overwhelmed you'll be and all the stress going through it.
This does not sound like an easy transition.
It definitely is not.
What can organizations do to make it easier?
That's a good question. I mean, I've seen a few different models, and honestly, I'm I'm not sure which one works better. I've seen, you've got companies like LinkedIn, for example, where they have a very, from what I hear outside of, I've never worked for LinkedIn, but they have a very structured IC to manager program where, for a few months you actually go through the training, and it sounds like they have a lot of, hand-holding along the process, which sounds like a very valuable thing. I'm not sure how you do it internally, though. I'll give you an example that I've seen and I've lived at Google, where we have this idea of a TLM, or a tech lead manager, and it's really meant to be a transitionary role where you're a tech lead on your current team, but at the same time you start having some M responsibilities or some manager responsibilities, and the goal, at least in theory, is to bridge that gap where you're still expected to contribute, to make some IC or individual contributor, contributions, and then you get a few added manager responsibilities. Usually they limit your team size as well to about 4 people or so. So that kind of helps you learn in the trenches, so to speak. And typically you have a more experienced manager working with you through that transition. So on paper, it all looks good. Where I've seen that kind of backfire or work poorly is that, it keeps the engineers in this kind of, I'm afraid I don't want to lose out on potential way back. It keeps them in this analysis paralysis, mode longer. And sometimes it even backfires in the sense of, oh, this is way too overwhelming. I cannot do that. I'm switching back quickly because again, you don't have the skills. You don't really appreciate how long it would take you to become a decent manager, and so you tend to give up a lot quicker.
Do you see the difference between a manager and a leader? Are those two different things?
I mean, they are, of course, in the sense of, you could be a leader without having sort of formal management, responsibilities, or, you could still lead and influence wherever you are without having the title or the direct reports to show for it. And often that's really, there's a lot of ways to lead in general. And if becoming a manager is one of them, where you have, some authority to go along with the influence you want to have, you often have to be a leader first, I find. And one of the most common questions you get from engineers is, how do I transition into management? And they're usually approaching it from a status angle, where they see it as a better kind of higher status role, which it is not. It's in fact, you should see it as a completely new role where you're kind of starting from scratch. But one of the ways to get closer to that is to start leading wherever you are.
One of the things I've noticed over the years is that people who move into this first line managerial role tend to have a very difficult time asking for help in any way, shape, or form. Why is it so hard for them to ask for help?
That's an interesting one. If you think about sort of how the typical software engineer kind of works, I think we are way more open as individual contributors to ask for help and ask questions. And maybe I'm biased, but to me, being in the field, it seems we do that more often than in other fields where there's often a lot of ego attached to saying I don't know or asking questions. But at least in the software world, people seem more open to be like, hey, I actually don't know about that. Help me here, no matter what your seniority is. Or at least people are more willing to do that. As a manager, I think it's a combination of two things. The first point of often not really knowing the right question to ask. You just feel stressed and overwhelmed. You think that's it, or you think that's the role. And I'll use my own story here. Like, when I first became a manager, I remember feeling, those feelings. And I was talking to a friend of mine at the time, and he was like, hey, but we have this mentoring thing. You could just find a mentor, a more experienced manager. And I decided to actually, meet with a mentor. And I was like, listen, I know asking the right question is half the answer. I don't know what question to ask. I just feel really, really bad about this. And as he affectionately put it, I was like a deer stuck in headlights when I first kind of, started talking to him, because I didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely a part of that. I think the other part is you want to show and kind of earn trust with your team quickly enough, and you kind of want to have, this perception that you know what you're doing, or that you've got things under control, or that you could actually, get the team moving forward. And that's a really hard balance when you're trying to figure out yourself along the way.
Have you ever seen a scenario where a team could have two managers, one being a junior and one being more senior, and survive?
I've seen it happen in the sense of, I think it only works well when the roles and responsibilities are very clear. But I've also seen it backfire a lot if the senior manager especially is stepping in or second guessing every decision. Because at some point, just like a probably easier example for others listening, think about sort of an engineering intern that showed up, or somebody who's less junior than you, where you can either like spoon feed them, what to do exactly, or you could let them fail and help them from that mistake along the way. And it takes a more experienced manager to recognize that difference and to give a junior manager that room to fail, because you're gonna fail. You're gonna make mistakes, and that's often how you learn. As long as you make it a safe environment to do so as much as you can. So and that's where I think figuring out the roles and responsibilities and the scope of influence and ownership becomes very, very important in that case.
Is it easier for people to ask for help inside or outside the company? You have an offering to do, to help that way. Is it easier for people to come to you than to go to their manager and ask for a mentor?
I believe so. Not just selfishly speaking, but I think it's also easier for people to ask for mentors outside of their current leadership chain. With larger companies, I think that's a large part of the appeal of having a mentorship network, where you could go somebody in a completely different org and ask for help and be very open and transparent with what you're going through. I think with going to your manager, there's always this, there's this heavy weight, because at the end of the day, he is responsible in part for your performance review at the end of the year. So part of you still wants to show that you are a good manager and you want to deliver there, but it's a tough balance. I often think you cannot be, or people find it hard to be 100% open and transparent unless you've worked with that person for years, or they've earned your trust in other means.
Boils down to psychological safety, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does, which unfortunately takes forever to build, and you could shatter it in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, or microseconds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Could even be faster than minutes. How does your offering work with a new manager?
Right. So I could talk more about it, but essentially I call it the leadership playbook, where I've got three main pillars: managing yourself, managing your people, and managing your projects. We can dive into the details, but what I put together is something that I've always wanted to see kind of starting out. Think of, you're an engineer writing a service, or, developing, some kind of software. Most of the time, hopefully, if you're doing your job well, you've got a dashboard that shows a bunch of graphs and a bunch of metrics that tells you what's going on, and if you're doing the right things or not. You could tell, what the volume of requests, for example, looks like, what your latency is, what the error rate is, et cetera, et cetera. I wish I could have something like that for my management career. And that's where I'm essentially trying to emulate with this offering. But the way I do it is, I work one-on-one individually with every kind of new manager that comes to me. I essentially work with them to implement the principles of this framework, and happy to dive into the principles in more depth to essentially make them become a more effective engineering manager.
How'd you come to this? I mean, what was it that you decided that you really needed to put this out in the marketplace and actually, in essence, go around companies who should be doing, I suggest, should be doing a lot of this themselves and aren't?
Yeah, I'm sure some companies out there are trying to do it. It's perhaps not simple enough, or not easy enough for them to. But yeah, the way I decided to do it is essentially from really all the mistakes that I made through my own journey. I've been fortunate enough to work on, to work with some large companies that had established kind of mentorship frameworks and had really good engineering leaders and coaches that helped me through it myself. So between that and between kind of my own, learning and reading and, taking courses and reading books on my own, I kind of, developed this for myself and to help others on my team that were, making that transition as well.
3 pillars. Which of the 3 is your favorite? If you had one that you had to say, I love this one, which one is it?
I think as a good manager, I should say the managing your people part, but definitely it's the managing yourself. I think it's my own personal favorite. I think it all starts with you knowing how to manage yourself better and how to establish the right systems for you to be effective and be successful. And until you have a good handle of that, I think you'll always be reactive and you'll always be, playing catch up essentially.
Doesn't that really require people have some sort of self-knowledge and ability to reflect?
Definitely. And that's one of the things that we try to build into the framework itself. I think, I mean, having a high degree of self-awareness, I think, is critical, to succeed generally, but especially in roles that involve a lot of, work with people where we need that. The analogy I like to use a lot, Scrum, for example, Sprint is a perfect example of, well-defined iterations where, if you're doing it by the book, you get to reflect and retrospect at the end. And it's this powerful feedback loop where, you learn, you improve, and you continue iteration. And I do exactly that with each one of the 3 pillars.
Is that where you start? Self-knowledge?
Yeah. So we start with a self-assessment of, how good do you think you are as a manager? And, sure we could add a link to that in the show notes where, listeners who are curious could take a look at it. But it really starts with that. If you think you're a 10 out of 10 manager, good luck. I got nothing to teach you. It sounds like you've got it. Great. You don't have a problem, right? It's kind of this, the 4 levels of, skill development where you're kind of unconsciously incompetent. So you're bad. You don't know you're bad. And then you're consciously incompetent. So now I'm bad, but I know it. And then it could start asking slightly better questions. And then, it's hard for me, I'm consciously competent. I'm starting to get good at this, but I still have to put a lot of effort and a lot of thought into it. And then finally, it's kind of like autopilot. You drive your car and, talk on the phone and you drink coffee at the same time. And you're not even thinking about the, mechanics of the driving anymore.
I am not convinced that there is a human being on the face of the earth can actually do all 3 of those things at once and not endanger the people around them.
Fair enough. A lot of people think they can, though. But
yeah. But yeah. Well, and that's the point. A lot of people think they can. You're using a self-assessment tool. Do you sometimes discover people are not very good at understanding their faults?
All the time. I think it's much, much easier to point out the faults in someone else than it is to
true. Yeah.
To look at it yourself. But I mean, that's where I think trying to make this as quantifiable as you can in some aspects it's really difficult. But finding ways to do that. And most of the time, engineers, I think, when faced with the right data, they will change their mind. Right? Like sometimes there's still some, I think, objective data that you could point to. And sometimes at the end of the day, you just have to stop being a victim and just take ownership for what's going on, right? Like there's only you can only rely on, excuses or, this person got lucky or this person, this project took off or he was in a bit better company or sure. I mean, some factors can help, slightly, but really until you own the process for yourself, you're never going to get better.
We could go way deeper into the model but I think it would be better if people actually reached out and talked to you about that versus listening to this online. If you woke up tomorrow morning and someone handed you your caffeinated beverage of choice, a magic wand, and said that you could solve any 2 problems that affect how someone becomes an engineering manager, what would those 2 things be and why?
That is a lot of power to be given. So I think, the number one thing is getting unfiltered feedback, true unfiltered feedback from from everyone you work with, which is really, really hard to do. And maybe, another way to get there is getting the power to know the right questions to ask. You could go to your manager and ask them, hey, do you have any feedback for me? And that's a really terrible question. It's not nuanced enough. Half the answer isn't how you phrase the question versus, hey, you've seen how I've, just led that meeting. I thought, this thing was off. Do you agree? Do you have, ways for me I could improve, for example? So that's the first thing is, finding a better way to get raw, unfiltered feedback from everyone around you. The second one, I want to go back to this, ownership idea, or the idea of not playing a victim, in the sense of, just not making excuses. If there is a way to instill just one thing in any, if I have a magic wand and I want everyone to have this kind of attitude or ability, it's just being the heroes of their own stories and that ownership, because I think that will lead you to figuring out all the other hard problems. And I'm not sure if that's where you're going with the question, but I think those are the ones that popped up.
Well, I was going nowhere with that one. That one was sort of wide open for you. I always find it interesting what comes out of that sort of outro question. Ahmed, this has been absolutely fantastic. How could people continue the conversation? How could they find out about you and your organization?
Thank you. Easiest way would be the website, thethrivingem.com. I'll have a specific link for folks that listen to this podcast in the show notes that would have more resources, including the assessment we mentioned, and they could just get in touch with me there and hopefully continue the conversation.
Thank you again. This has been absolutely marvelous. Ahmed Wasfy, thank you again for spending time with the Software Process and SPaMCAST listeners.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Half the answer is how you phrase the question. Was sort of a money shot there.
Nice.
There were a couple of them. So I think there's some solid stuff there. So I really like that a lot.
Yeah, no, I thought it was nice. You sent me, the kind of general questions, which helped me, prepare some of the talking points. I'm not as, as fast sometimes, but on my feet. But I thought it was pretty good.
Cool.
Be interested to see kind of how hopefully listeners react to this.
That's what I hope for.
That's on them. The other thing, so like I do, pages like this for podcasts. So where I'll have, just for with your own logo and stuff like that. And then eventually I'd link to, hopefully, your sites and show notes and whatnot. But yeah, so let me know when it's kind of coming out already, and I'll set up that, and we'll make sure we have the backlinks to you as well.
I am targeting this. I've got stuff all over the board over here.
I think you sent me the board last time.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
it's gotten a little messier, which is good. I like messy. I still like sticky notes. So I'm not this Sunday, 2 Sundays from now, whatever that ends up being. So it should be going up roughly about then. I will know for certain probably by the end of this weekend what the production schedule is, and I will let you know.
Sounds good. I'll set up kind of the skeleton of the page in the meantime, and we'll have happening. Any kind of thoughts and sort of how I came on, anything I could improve? I'm making my own mistake asking for feedback without a very good question, but
no, I actually thought it was really good. I did try. I didn't try. I know I did. I threw a couple of curveballs in there, just because it felt like it was where the conversation wanted to go. I thought the advice was good. What I should have asked on the mentor thing is whether or not whether or not organizations actually do that well. It sounds like in your organization it does, right? I've seen mentor programs where, go find yourself a mentor.
Right.
And it's like, well, who the hell do I ask? And you don't ask anybody early on. So I should have maybe plopped on that a little harder. But, I think there's solid stuff through there. It has content and it's not an ad. So, and I think people will like it. And it was significantly better. I did one with a guy named Scott Showalter, which I won't ever do again. Just saying. Yeah. He just dreamy the whole time. It's like, this isn't tangible. What you talked about was tangible. So I think my listeners like tangible things. So when I do the editing, I might pick up a couple of other things.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I appreciate this. I appreciate it. Yeah, if you pick up other things, please send them my way. Always looking to do these better. But yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you for this was really good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom, and hope you feel better and you're recovering from the cold. Hopefully before Iceland. I mean, I think you've got some time before then. But
the cold will get over. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe it's an allergy. Who knows? I will ignore it, and it is better than it was yesterday. So that's what counts.
Exactly.
All
Improvement. Right. Awesome. All right. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Talk to you soon.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
In Reread Saturday News, after the conclusion of Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die, there are 3 brief sections with practical tips for making ideas memorable. The dust cover states, with added material, now even stickier. The added material provides more food for thought for using Made to Stick. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 773, we will feature our essay on why, as professionals, we should strive to grow a little every day. We'll also have a visit from John M. Quigley, who brings his alpha and omega of product development to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?